Alrighty, this in front of me is the Sony Xperia X Mark III. It's the successor to last year's Xperia X Mark II. Let's see in this video if this phone is the same old or if there's new features which will make this phone a worthy, enticing upgrade. Starting off with the unboxing. It's nothing too special. It's a cheap white box with Sony and Xperia branding. On the back it showcases the key features. But anyways, let's cut the seal and get into it. Here's the beast itself. Move that to the side real quick. Underneath that is the quick start guide. I'll just quickly show it on the screen right now. Pause it if you want to read it. And in the below compartment, you've got the measly 7.5 watt charger. And here is the USB-A to USB-C cable. And below that, there's pretty much nothing else. Now that's over with, let's move on to the design and build quality. The Xperia X has a glass back, not a plastic back, which it seems like from their website, using Gorilla Glass 6, and it has a plastic frame. On the left side, there's the SIM tray, which accepts dual SIMs or one SIM and one SD card. On the right, there's a power button with integrated fingerprint sensor and volume buttons above it. And also another button on the right side that activates Google Assistant, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, this button doesn't double as a shutter button for the camera app, which would have been cool to see. On the bottom, would you look at that? It's the headphone jack, which supports LDAC and high-res audio support. I'm sorry I get so emotional over headphone jacks. It's 2020, it's really rare to see that in smartphones these days. Anyways, there's also USB-C, which is USB Type-C 3.1. Regarding the phone's weight, the phone has some weight to it, but it's not really heavy. And the thickness is average like other phones. The camera bump is extremely minimal and almost flush with the back glass. The back design is pretty minimalistic and stylish without overdoing it, like other phones in 2021, Xiaomi, Samsung and all that other phone manufacturers. The phone is extremely grippy because the width of the phone is narrow and it's overall comfortable to hold. The Xperia X doesn't have wireless charging, but it has NFC support, so if you use Google Pay or whatnot, this will be useful to you. It thankfully has water resistance of IP65/68, which isn't very common on budget mid-range phones these days. In the UK, this phone comes in black, white and this pretty nice blue colour. Although I do have to mention that I really liked last year's Xperia X green colour. That phone looked fantastic. That colour looked fantastic. The fingerprint sensor is integrated with the power button. It's not the fastest, but then again, it's pretty reliable and accurate. So I don't really care it's slow. I just want an accurate fingerprint sensor. And no, unfortunately, this phone doesn't have a face unlock feature. It has a notification LED on the top right corner, which is awesome. The LED light also turns green when your phone is close to charging fully. The vibration motor on this phone is pretty weak and unnoticeable when your phone is ringing or when it's laid on the table, which kind of sucks. Moving on to the display. It's a 6-inch Full HD display with an aspect ratio of 21:9. 6-inch in 2021 can be considered kind of a small display, I guess. It fits in one hand and the size is still decent for media consumption such as YouTube. It's an OLED display that supports HDR with 457 pixels per inch. The display quality looks pretty good overall. It's somewhat vivid, not too oversaturated. It has deep black colors, obviously because it's an OLED display. The viewing angles are also pretty good. Unfortunately, Sony has decided not to give this phone a 90Hz or 120Hz refresh rate display. Instead, it has the same old 60Hz display. This may be a deal breaker for some people, but I don't really mind it since I'm used to 60Hz. This phone doesn't have a punch hole or a notch. It has a slim top and bottom bezel and it looks pretty awesome. The display also has Gorilla Glass 6 protection, so that's pretty cool. The screen brightness is 345 nits and 559 nits with adaptive brightness. The display is manageable indoors, but once you get outdoors, especially when it's a sunny summer day, then you start to wish that the display was just a bit brighter. Moving on to the processor, it packs in a 8nm Snapdragon 695G, which supports Bluetooth 5.1. The Wi-Fi and data connectivity is pretty good, but I will have to talk about the performance. When compared to my Note 10 Plus that gets 66 megabits per second download speed and 16 megabits per second upload, this Xperia gets 55 megabits per second download speed and 12 upload speed, which is a tad bit slower than I expected. As for the processor day-to-day experience, I'll get to that later when I'm talking about the software experience. And yes, of course, this phone supports 5G, sub-6 5G to be specific. The GPU in this phone is the Qualcomm Adreno 619. The phone is capable of running lightweight apps or medium heavy games, but when you start to get to the heavy games like PUBG Mobile, that's when you start to see the most frame drops. PUBG allows a maximum of 40 FPS on this phone with the lowest graphic settings possible, and even then you can still feel the frame drops occasionally, especially when you're having close combat with an enemy. As you can tell, it is a bit frustrating. Like when you're having frame drops when you're close to an enemy, that's when you want the most performance, right? But it's the opposite. So it kind of want to make you rage at it, if that makes sense. But Sony doesn't advertise this phone as a gaming phone or anything. The phone doesn't heat up too much when playing games, which is nice. Moving on to the cameras, which is Sony's territory. This phone has 3 cameras on the back. 8 megapixel 120 degree field of view ultra-wide camera, a main 12 megapixel camera, and lastly an 8 megapixel telephoto camera with 2x optical zoom. The back camera is capable of recording up to 4K 30 fps, unfortunately not 60 fps. The selfie camera is an 8 megapixel camera which supports up to 1080p 30 fps video recording. When you look at the preview or the viewfinder camera app before taking a picture, you'll notice that the dynamic range isn't the best, the image isn't the sharpest or the most detailed. However, once you capture that image and let the software process the image and all the good stuff, then the images comes out pretty crisp, pretty vibrant, and contains plenty of detail and also good dynamic range. Even the ultra-wide camera is just as good. The 2x optical zoom is pretty good as well, and you don't usually get an optical zoom camera on budget mid-range phones, so this is nice to see. The selfie camera is decent for casual selfies if you're into that, but it's not the most vibrant and isn't the most brightest when compared to other phones, especially in low light, and the selfie pictures have a soft toned look to it. The video recording capabilities is pretty good. It has good quality, good detail, it's sharp, it is vibrant. However, I've noticed that the main wide camera has auto-focusing issues on my phone. I'll put up the video footage on the screen right now, or later when I get to it. You'll notice that it has a hard time focusing on objects or the scene overall. And another bad thing is the video stabilization. Since this phone doesn't have hardware optical image stabilization, it relies on the software's electronic image stabilization. I've seen many EIS footages before from OnePlus and other phones, and the one on this phone is kind of disappointing. The video footage looks shaky, unstable and unpleasant, and if you start running or do any other crazy movement, then the footage will probably be more shaky than a Japanese earthquake. Moving on to the speakers, speaker, since it's one speaker. Anyways, it's a single firing speaker. Unfortunately, the speaker is not loud, and when you put the volume to like above 60 or 70%, then it starts sounding tinny and kind of horrible. The quality of the speaker itself isn't very good either. The sound quality sounds poor when compared to other phones in this price segment, and it tends to lack bass. The only upside of this speaker is that it's front firing. The speaker is definitely not this phone's strong point. As for the storage and RAM, it comes with 128GB of base storage, which is up from last year's 64GB of base storage, and this phone supports microSD card, which is pretty cool. It has 6GB of RAM, which is up from last year's 4GB of RAM, so this is a welcome change. It can hold about 6 to 8 lightweight apps in the background, so that's good to know. Onto the battery. It has a humongous battery capacity of 4500 mAh, which is up from last year's 3600 mAh. It's a massive increase. The battery life on this phone is beyond amazing. It can easily and comfortably last an entire day and almost 2 days if you're really careful and you use lightweight apps. Although the screen on time isn't the best benchmark for battery life, I'm still gonna say what it is. It's getting about 5 to 5.5 hours of screen on time, which I think is pretty good. But this is all expected since this phone has a 60Hz display with a mid-range processor. As for the charging, this phone supports charging speeds up to 30 watts, which is up from last year's 18 watts. The phone supports quick charge and power delivery. While this is nice and all, sadly Sony only ships a 7.5 watt charger inside the box, and it is really slow to fully charge the phone. It's even slow when you're using Samsung's 25 watt charger, which supports USB Power Delivery 3.0. It takes about 3 hours to fully charge the phone from 0%, and after charging it for 30 minutes, you'll get about 20% charge. So yeah, it's kind of painfully slow. Hopping over to the software. The phone comes shipped with Android 11 out of the box. The software is basically stock Android with cool and useful features from Sony. There's awesome features like battery care, which has been a thing since 2016, and it's like Apple's optimized charging. There's also a stamina mode, which is basically a power saving mode. There is also a side sense feature, which is essentially a stripped down version of Samsung's Edge panel feature, and you can activate one-handed mode and multi-window function from it. I do have to mention that the one-handed mode cannot be enabled when you have gesture navigation enabled, which is the strangest thing ever. Every other Android phone I've had or tested can do one-handed mode while the gesture navigation is enabled. This phone also has smart backlight control feature, which keeps the phone on as long as you're staring at it, but the display turns off when you stop looking at it, so it's a nice feature. Adaptive brightness, aka auto brightness, isn't enabled by default when you get the phone, which is pretty strange. To turn this on, just go into the display settings and enable it. This phone also has this feature called DSEE Ultimate, which claims to upscale compressed music using artificial intelligence. In all honesty, I cannot tell the difference with this feature enabled. Does this phone have pre-installed apps? Yes it does, unfortunately. Some of the apps you can uninstall and some of the apps you can only disable, like the Facebook app, which is pretty frustrating and kind of annoying. As for the day-to-day experience, the app launching speeds is relatively quick. I haven't been facing any bugs or glitches on this phone. There are some lag and frame drops in the animation sometimes when swiping up to go home. In order to fix this, you have to restart the phone and then the frame drops disappear. It can be somewhat down to the Snapdragon 690, but Sony can also be held accountable for not fully optimizing it. Also, due to the long aspect ratio, some apps there is a thick black bar at the bottom, which is annoying to look at. Also, despite this phone having an OLED display, it doesn't have any sort of ambient display or always on display, which is a huge bummer for me. Also, if you haven't noticed the wallpaper by now, it's one of many Sony's live lock screen to home screen wallpaper. It kind of reminds me of Samsung's Galaxy S8 and S9 when it had live wallpapers, so I love this feature on this phone. Moving on to the software updates, there isn't really a guaranteed length of software updates. Sony says they aim for 2 years, and that's kinda true. The Xperia X Mark I launched with Android 9 and it got Android 10 later on, so you should expect about one major software update on this phone. As for how long it takes to get the update, Android 11 launched back in like September 2020, and last year's Xperia X Mark II got the same Android 11 update about 4 months later in January 2021. So software update isn't this phone's strong point either. Let's hop over to the price. The price of this phone is £400 or €430, which is well up from last year's Xperia X Mark II, which costed about £320. On one side, there are worthy upgrades like bigger storage, more RAM, but then it lacks things like higher refresh rate displays, it lacks stereo speakers or a good rich quality single fairing speaker, it lacks fast charging out of the box. There's good things and bad things about it. If you got last year's Xperia 10 or something like that, then I would say it's not worth it to upgrade to this. But if you really want to buy this phone, then yeah, sure, go for it. It would be more enticing if it was cheaper, or you should probably wait until there's some sort of discount on this phone. Maybe the Christmas discounts or something like that, Black Friday. Anyways, it was fun reviewing this phone. It's a good phone and it has some cool features that I love, but it lacks some things that makes it kind of disappointing and it kind of lets you down. If you got any questions or if I missed out on any information, then let me know down in the comments below. I'll try my best to respond. That's all for this video. If you've enjoyed, then consider liking and subscribing, you know, all that cheesy stuff, and have a nice and cool day this hot summer if you live in a hot country. Also, wear sunscreen is very important.